What was the first question I was asking? Where do you buy your clothes?
Through the mail.
I do too. Can you talk about the whole idea of Beaumarchais and pain? Maybe explain a bit about Beaumarchais.
Well, when Franklin, writing to his son-in-law a letter of introduction in 1774 from London to introduce Paine, used the opening line of the letter. It's fascinating. It says, with this letter I introduce a worthy and genius young man. Now, when we read that letter today, it sounds to us as if it's referring to how clever, skillful Paine is. When in fact, in the 18th century, the word ingenious had a very specific meaning, and it really introduces us to sort of the heart of Paine's achievement. Ingenious meant in the 18th century, one of its meanings was giving birth to self, being self-made, an obvious distinction to inheriting one's position. One works hard and is responsible for one's place in life. As opposed to being to the manner born, one gives birth to himself. This idea is captured in this period beautifully in 1784 by Beaumarchais, who was a French playwright and also a friend and helper of the American cause, was involved in raising money for the Americans, in his play, The Marriage of Figaro, in which the King of France actually felt was subversive. And what was particularly upsetting about it was an exchange in Act 5 when Figaro and Almaviva, who've been chasing around for 5 acts, both trying to win over Susanna, when at a particular moment of frustration, Figaro shouts out to Almaviva, who is of course a great count, says, "What have you done to deserve all you have?" And he then answers his own question and says, "You have done nothing but be born, whereas I, on the other hand, have had to work hard to achieve everything I have." That, in a sense, is the subversive spirit of the age. What it suggests is that men of privilege, like Almaviva, who are simply idle, as Paine would call them in The Rights of Man, idle parasites, drones on society, are going to be replaced by hard-working men who make themselves and who are themselves authors of self. And in that sense, Paine, his life embodies that. He was himself an uneducated, educated himself through his own reading, was not a formally trained scholar. His writings reflect that in their tone, and his achievement is all from his own hard work, so to speak. And in that sense, it's a marriage of a peculiarly unique marriage of Paine and his own personal characteristics and what in fact are the social characteristics writ large in America.
I'm going to sort of travel over that land again. Yeah. So that it's in contrast, with the self-made men. Well, of course, they're always self-made men. Margaret, you're going to watch the door. Okay?
At some point, my wife may walk in.
Here.
Oh, okay.
Hi. So can you just give us a little picture of the world that Paine lived in? He was born in 1737.
Yeah, well, a society in which you are born, when he says to Almaviva, what have you done to deserve what you have? You were born, merely born, suggests that indeed not only Almaviva, but all layers of society, all the ranks in society tended to do what they were born into. Paine's father was a staymaker. Paine begins as a staymaker. The assumption is that you do what your father has done. You are born into a certain rank. That's where the expression "know your place" comes from. You have a place that's assigned to you in society. To make yourself and to make to be author of your own self suggests that you have not received your place in society, but you can be, in the jargon of the American Army today, you can be all that you can be, i.e. there is opportunity. This is where the phrase equal opportunity comes from. There is an opportunity for you to make yourself into what you can be. You are not restricted to the place you are born into in society. What Paine represents in his own life and is the spirit of the age which is repudiating that. That's what Beaumarchais captures, and that's why Louis XVI is angry and sees this as subversive. That the poor and those who are assigned lowly ranks in society are not going to accept their positions, but will be, which is why we call it upstart, which is why we call it upward mobility, which is why we call people who were kings and queens your highness, because they are higher than you are in the social structure. And we actually still use that somehow, some ways. In for example, judges sit above the rest in a courtroom because it's to indicate their higher social, higher status in that context.
I think the myth of America, though, is that it was always like that. You know, in Franklin's popularity, you always could get ahead by working hard. And in a certain way, in America, pre-Paine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that wasn't exactly true. It certainly wasn't true with becoming a governor of a state or something like that.
Yeah, to the extent that in the 17th and early 18th century, America is an offshoot of Britain, it retains some of these same social assumptions about hierarchy and rank and assigned status. But America is, by the late 18th century, has developed a whole set of social attitudes which are quite close to those which are coming quite clearly to dominate the American scene, whereas in England and in France they are still seen as subversive. In America, and this is what Paine recognizes when he comes here, and why there is this marriage of Paine, the rebel, Paine, the upstart, disrespectful of assigned ranks and unearned privilege, being so fond of America and loving America, because America has come to represent by that time this social ideal writ large, because it is a new society, because it doesn't have the inbuilt traditions of status and rank and deference. And that's what I mean when I say that there's a unique marriage between what is an emerging American ideal of the place of the common man and of the ideal of the common man and of status achieved through one's own activity and Paine's own ideology.
I'm going to ask you to restate this in a sort of story way. You know, in 17, he arrives, that kind of thing, and he finds. Just say the same thing, but I'm going to tell you a story. Here's this guy.
Well, in 1774, Paine is 37. He has tried a whole series of careers. He comes to America. In Britain, a man like Paine, uneducated, relatively unsophisticated, from lower middle class, working class stock, farming stock, in a Quaker, which by definition means that he's also an outsider from the establishment, is a marginal figure. He comes to America, and in America he finds people like himself making their own careers, achieving their own rewards through their own energy. He finds a society in which privilege, there is, of course, some privilege, and there are people who, like Gouverneur Morris, who will look down upon Paine because his manners are uncouth and because he doesn't speak all that well. There is some privilege, but by and large, people like Paine, sharing his ideas, are considered valuable and important, and are not seen as subversive or as as undermining the established order. There is no established hierarchy. What established hierarchy there was has by the late 18th century fairly well disappeared. It's the America of Benjamin Franklin, who in his autobiography tells us about his common origins and how he worked hard to make, and that is the social ideal in America. And Paine comes to this country, and it's interesting, at the beginning of his American career in 1774, this letter from Franklin introducing him is sort of bookended by Paine's own writing at the end of his life in his will, when he says of himself, he says, I have lived an honest life useful to mankind. Now there again are two wonderful 18th century phrases, an honest life and useful to mankind. Honest to us today sounds like, well, I didn't deceive anyone, I was respectable. But honest in the 18th century also had another meaning, a very powerful meaning, which is, I think, what Paine is getting at. Honest meant unsophisticated, common, ordinary. One of Paine's favorite one of the most often quoted lines in The Rights of Man is Paine saying, of greater use to mankind is one honest man than all the crown ruffians in the world. And what he's saying there again is not somebody who tells the truth. It's the value of the common man, of the unsophisticated person like himself. The useful, of course, is again a commentary on the times. To say that I have lived a life useful to mankind means that I have not been lazy, I have not been a parasite like the social ideal in Britain. And this, of course, reflects the heavy impact of the Protestant ethic. It reflects Paine's own Quaker background in the sense that we are here to be useful and to do good. And that sense of, and how are you useful and how do you do good? It's through your work. It's not by being a lazy drone or a parasite, as he calls the aristocrats. It's also being a person of talent and ability, which is what he suggests he has, and people like himself, as opposed to the nobility, which he defines as no ability.
Tell me a bit about Paine's table manners. as we know them.
Well, Paine never wrote about his own table manners, but we know of Paine's table manners because of a famous line of criticism attributed to Gouverneur Morris, who says how, at a particularly delicate moment when Paine, who at the time I believe was secretary to the Congress, has just been involved in the Dean affair, and Gouverneur Morris, in addition to all the political motives that he has to get rid of Paine, also says of Paine how uncouth he is and how vulgar he is. He doesn't speak well, he has poor table manners. I'm reminded when I hear of this, and it brings us back to Beaumarchais in The Marriage of Figaro, of Mozart, of whom it was said, for example, in Peter Schaffer's Amadeus, Mozart is depicted as a rather vulgar buffoon, given to unsophisticated and rather crude displays. And in fact, this is quite accurate. Mozart was a rather vulgar person, given to rather obvious displays of disrespect for people he was with. Yes, and he passed gas, which would have pleased Franklin, who wrote an essay about this. But this is always usually attributed to sort of poor maladjustment of this child prodigy who never quite acquired the social habits and graces of aristocratic society. And I've always felt that there was about that in Mozart, and also in Paine, who after all wined and dined with the great, just as Mozart did. But the persistence of this sense of Paine as vulgar and crude, which follows him through his life, through his depictions of him as sometimes drunk, etc., always makes me think that of the possibility that this was a form of social aggression. One of the ways you show disrespect for hierarchy and those who you feel are unjustifiably privileged is by mocking the codes of civility which they so carefully cultivate. And in that sense, Paine's whole life is a series of disrespectful pronouncements, mocking the King of England, even mocking the President of the United States in his anger at Washington for not helping him when he was in France, and writing off this bitter attack on the man who has by now become this icon of worship and respect in America.
Just wanted to go back over something. His manners, his disrespect. A lot of people talk about and write about Paine's rage. His rage. I mean, he's rage. But I when I read him, he's an angry young man. Except he's young. And maybe you could talk a bit about that. There's a passion in him, and the passion is very directed.
Well, Paine has discovered in America what he calls the ideal embodiment of the values that he believes in. America represents a land of opportunity. America represents a land of freedom. There is in him, in his early, in his writings are critical. They are angry against England in 1776. They are angry against monarchy and aristocracy in England in 1792. But there is a sense in Paine that he is also speaking for the future. That there is when he and this emerges in his depictions of sort of the utopian or the ideal purpose that America is going to serve, when he says that freedom has been hunted around the globe, it has been evicted from Britain, and it is now in England, it is now in America. There is a tempering the anger and the rage at unjustified privilege, at the rule of stupidity. I mean, his mocking comments about hereditary rule when he writes in the Rights of Man, would we ever believe in a hereditary mathematician or a hereditary musician, and yet we believe in hereditary rulers and hereditary leaders? That kind of anger at unjustified privilege or at nobility who have no ability is tempered and is modified by a tone of self-confidence that he speaks for the future, and that the future is America and American ideals. And so the rage, there is the rage and the anger, but there's also a self-confidence that Paine, in his own person and in his own life and in what he has found in America, represent the future. There's almost a secular sense of a millenarian vision here. The future is by which I mean the future is one of progress. Kings and aristocrats will fall. We live in an age of revolution. Paine says revolutions in the past were simply efforts to go back to what was before, but now there is a new notion of revolution in which everything is fundamentally transformed into a new order. There is the self-confidence in Paine that he perceives this, and that the nobility and the aristocracy and the monarchy are doomed in a kind of sense of the iron law of progress, which America embodies for him.
Maybe you can link this, and don't be afraid of repeating yourself. So tell us the story of common sense from this point of view. Because the thing that's extraordinary, are you okay? Yep. The extraordinary thing about common sense is this, I don't have words in your mouth, I don't think people were always saying, well, the Parliament is unjust, but we are subjects of the king. And to me, the big break, one of the many big breaks in common sense is shoved into the king. Maybe you could just tell that in the story. It's 1775.
Well, in January of 1775, Americans have not yet decided what's happening. I mean, they have. There has been this tension with Parliament and with George III and the policies of Townsend and Lord North since 1764. There have been troubles before. It's not, and in the middle of this, there seems to be an effort by the monarchy and the Parliament to ease up and to return. And after all, Edmund Burke has made these passionate speeches in Parliament, requesting that the Americans be granted their traditional rights, and it's not yet there has been this increased tension after the Tea Party and armed conflict by 1775. But still, the idea of severing themselves from the monarchy, of making it on their own. And here the similarity between sort of making it on your own and being and knowing your place, and as you are a part of the British Empire and you are one small entity in it, and suddenly Americans are confronted with, shall we make it on our own, we as an upstart nation? And Paine comes and says, do it. And Paine says, monarchs are, and indeed he in plain language that American mechanics, people who work with their hands, and American farmers can understand. He says the monarchy has been absurd and worthless. That's why in the Old Testament the prophets decreed invade against monarchy. Do it. America represents the future. America is going to give birth to the new world. America is going to change the world and is going to write a new slate of history. And it's that combination of Paine representing in his own life and representing what in Europe is still this is very much this very subversive notion of making it on your own as opposed to keeping to your place, that comes at that particular moment, and America will indeed, in terms of the impact of the pamphlet, will indeed make it on its own and be an upstart and overthrow a hierarchy, so that...
Let's just slow down a bit. People, this was published in January 76. It was a pamphlet. And then what happened? You know, just if you could give it as a progression in terms of people.
Well, it becomes incredibly successful. The common sense. Common Sense is reprinted, and 100,000, no one knows exactly how many. Paine used to claim that more copies of his pamphlets, like Common Sense, were sold or read than the Bible. There's a discernible shift in opinion. Washington and others have written or wrote to friends that this pamphlet seems to be persuading people that independence is the path to go, that indeed severing ourselves, overthrowing the traditional relationships of America to its hierarchical authority, Britain, is appropriate, and it is provided the legitimacy of the Old Testament. America is told in the pamphlet that it will be a great trading nation, that it can be a great power in the world, but also that it represents an idea. And that's what's so powerful about Paine's Common Sense, is how flattering it is to Americans at the time. That what they were doing, that they shouldn't feel bad about what they were doing. They shouldn't feel guilty about what they were doing in their move to independence. That they should realize that this is the future of history, that they were speaking for the future. And in that sense, that little pamphlet has had such an incredible enduring impact on American life. And when Ronald Reagan or his speechwriters cite this passage in the 1970s and 1980s, it's perfectly legitimate, because for Ronald Reagan, America in the 1980s was once again showing the world what individualism and getting government off our back, etc., would do. And in that sense, the mission of America, the special mission of America, which was attributed to it by Paine in 1776, has endured an American sense of our specialness. And it's very important. I mean, if you're about to overthrow a king, which by now independence movements we take for granted, but in 1776, after all, we were the first. In the 1950s and 1960s, we forget that the colonial revolutions in Africa and Asia looked to America and said, you were the first people to get your independence from a foreign imperialist power. But in 1775 and 1776, what an incredible, unheard of enterprise this is, and how fearful people must have been. And what Paine is doing is saying, what you are doing is God's will, it is the will of history and of providence, and it is a special mission that is given to Americans in breaking from Britain to be the beacon of freedom and liberty for the world, and for democratic revolutions. And then what he would do in the 1790s was that he would say to the English in the Rights of Man, America established a republic, America repudiated the monarchy in its War of Independence. Now you, meaning the English, should overthrow the monarchy and have a republic. And he uses America as the model.
I mean, in a sense, he was prophetic. I mean, it is, you read him, and it didn't happen the way, I mean, you read a lot of history, and it didn't happen that way, but he was onto something. How does science fit in all this? That is the whole, it's 25 past. How does the whole science thing, I mean, it's a curious thing. Maybe you could just explain it.
Well, Paine's interest in science is illustrated by his lifelong obsession with and passion for this iron bridge that he had designed, and which indeed, in furthering it, in trying to get it off the ground as a project which brought him back to France in the late 1780s, is an interesting illustration of how science in the 18th century was wrapped up with progressive politics, indeed even subversive politics. The other important figures in the American Revolution, like Jefferson and Franklin, were scientists. One of Jefferson's closest friends was Joseph Priestley. Joseph Priestley in England, the discoverer of oxygen, was himself a leading scientific radical. In England, the scientific community, by and large, were part of the whole nexus of reformers, those who wanted to change society. There's a famous quote when it's Franklin, I believe, who writes to Joseph Priestley after the discovery of oxygen. What do you want to do with this now that you've got it? You want to blow up the rulers of the world? So basic is the identification of science and reform and change. Paine here too speaks the spirit of the age. The scientists themselves were generally self-taught men. Science here, we're not talking about the theoretical science of Newton. We're talking about the very practical science of a man like Priestley or Franklin with his work on electricity and the stove and eyeglasses. We're talking about the very practical science of a Priestley who, in addition to his work on oxygen, is doing chemistry for the manufacturers in Birmingham and Manchester, who at this time these manufacturers who are fueling the Industrial Revolution are actually radicals. They are critics of the established order because they feel that they are people of talent and of merit, and they deserve their place in society, and they deserve rewards and privilege, and they look around and they see rewards and privilege going to landed aristocrats who do nothing useful. The scientist is doing something useful. So the scientists, and there's also a third link to this, which is science, political reform, and also religion, inasmuch as most of these scientists, like Paine, were dissenters from the Church of England. They were not Anglicans. They were either Quakers